Are you curious about the untold stories of the legendary women who helped create the Ontario wine industry? How does each woman's story not only inspire us, but also reveals valuable career and personal advice that we can use in our own lives? And how have these women also shaped the future of the Ontario wine industry, and what does that look like? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and insider tips and more. If you're just watching this video on the replay, please, in the comments, type the word replay. I want to hear from you. Where are you logging in from? What city? What's the weather like? And of course, if you're here with me live, I want to hear from you as well. Get in there. Let me know what's in your glass or whatever, where you're logging in from. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online wine and food pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, like our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. I'm live streaming this video for the first time on Facebook and YouTube. But it's based on a recorded conversation that I had for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. But however, I will be here live in the comments. So get in there. Let me know what stories you're enjoying. Do you have any other questions? And I'll be answering you live in the comments. I want to hear from you, if that's not clear already. So, before I introduce our guest, let me say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of her terrific new book, Sharing a Glass. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. Jennifer Wilhelm is a certified sommelier, and she's taught at the Niagara College for 17 years. She was named the 2010 Ontario Wine Educator of the Year at the VQA Promoters Awards. She has received the Lieutenant Governor's Community Volunteer Award for her contributions to the Ontario wine industry. Jennifer is the author of Sharing a Glass, Inspirational Memoirs and Memories of the Women Who Shaped Ontario's Grape and Wine Industry. The book is the first in Canada to chronicle the significant contributions that women have made in the grape and wine industry and the challenges they faced and overcame. And she joins us now from her home in Niagara. So great to have you here with us, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalie. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
Awesome. I can't wait to dive into this. I mean, we've just got so much to talk about. All right. But before we do, tell us about some of your more memorable wine moments. Maybe starting with the time when you were in a restaurant and a server was opening a bottle of sparkling wine. What happened?
Well, it was those early days of corkage and you could bring your own. And so a few of us in the trade had thought, oh, let's meet after work and we'll each bring a bottle. And so we did, and we were waiting. It was a busy night in the restaurant, and our sparkling wine was on the table, and we thought, oh gosh, we're 4 sommeliers sitting here. One of us can surely open this bottle of wine. And so I said, okay, great, I'll open it. And our food had just been delivered and it was a busy restaurant, and I opened the bottle and it had been rolling around in the trunk of my friend's car. It wasn't cold enough. So, all the evils that we wish not for our bottle of sparkling. And when I opened it, the cork ricocheted across our table, smashed all of our wine glasses.
Oh my God.
Went across to another table and took out their wine glasses.
Wow.
And everyone just sat stunned, surrounded by broken glass and covered in sparkling wine.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I can just imagine. I'm surprised that people didn't hit the floor thinking there was like gunshots or something. So how did you recover from that? Or are you still dealing with the trauma?
We still laugh about it, but the server came over and she said, did you do that? You should have waited for a professional.
Oh, yes. It was because you were amateurs.
No, we all laughed, but I tell that story to my students and I say, when we're talking about restocking fridges between busy, sparkling wine days like Valentine's and Mother's Day and New Year's Eve, I talk to them about inventory systems and make sure that you're pulling, the most stable, coldest bottles forward. So I think I kind
Right.
of tried to look at it as a learning experience and let my students know, this can happen, even if you are a professional.
That's a great story. I love it. Great attitude, too. Um, so tell us also, you had a memory from the 2013 International Cool Climate Chardonnay event known as I4C by the cool kids. I'm stumbling over it. I'm not a cool kid. But what happened there?
Oh, this is another example of best laid plans and what actually happens. And so in 2013, we were really excited to welcome the world to Niagara and celebrate Chardonnay and showcase, our beautiful properties and all of our partner wineries that were involved. And it was July and it was hot. And not only was it hot and humid, for the cool climate Chardonnay celebration, but we had a hurricane and it knocked the power out of Niagara. And most of the wineries that were hosting didn't have power, didn't have water, didn't have, any of these things that we think are so important. But the night of the event, the day of the event, the big grand tasting was taking place at a local winery, and this hurricane came in and, lifted tents and knocked out power, and guests were soaked.
Wow.
And, we were pouring at the far, far end of this vineyard. And so the guests ran inside, but
Sure.
we had the wine at the far end. So,
In the middle of a hurricane.
in the
Wow.
middle of a hurricane. And you think about carrying cardboard boxes in a hurricane, and, you're juggling them, and all of these bottles are falling out of the wet cardboard.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So you brought everything inside then, did you?
We brought everything inside that we could, and it was a good example of people were there in good spirits to celebrate one another and beautiful wine. It was an example of the fact that in the grape and wine industry, it's agriculture, and we are always at the mercy of the elements,
So
whether it's
true.
spring frosts or hail or freezes or, or hurricanes. And so you have to work with the weather.
Huh. Yeah. That's a beautiful example of that. So, even though everyone was probably a bit of a drowned rat, did they end up having fun in the tasting inside?
It was so much fun. And, people had boots on and bare feet, and the event was memorable, which is what we hope.
I'll bet. Great recovery. Oh my gosh. Okay, cool. And in 2015, you also remember that event, the I4C, for some reason?
The reason why I remember that, and the reason why I'm bringing up I4C, but this could be any gathering within the wine industry, where we all come together. And you mentioned me receiving the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario volunteer award. We all volunteer in the wine industry. We come together, we collaborate, we help one another. We want to see each other succeed. We want events to be successful and memorable and full of good cheer. And again, it's July, so we're at the mercy of weather, and it was hot, and we were almost throwing ourselves in the big troughs of ice where the wine was. But you're drained and you're tired. And the end of that night, we came together, the chefs, the servers, the volunteers, the organizers, the visiting winemakers. It was everyone, and just, shared a glass and talked to each other about what was happening in your corner of the woods and what was happening in your corner of the world, and shared knowledge and insights and support. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. And it was just one of those examples of camaraderie and community and support, and a great reminder that wine might lead us to this industry, but it's our relationships with the people that keep us here.
Oh, lovely. That could be the subtitle for your book as well. And you ended up staying talking till 4 in the morning or something
In
like
the
that?
morning. And then
Oh
we
my
but
gosh.
then we went and served brunch at Ravine.
Oh, of course, yes. Wine people don't need sleep. Um, so, the inspiration for your new book, Sharing a Glass, is clearly the women that you profiled. But what actually inspired you to actually publish a book about them as opposed to writing a series of magazine articles? Tell us about that.
Um, Rather than a series of magazine articles, that's a good question. I love books. As
Mm-hmm.
a child, I found a lot of inspiration in books. I looked for role models in books. There's something about holding a book, the
Yes.
longevity of a book. I love
Yes.
libraries. And so we spend a lot of time on screens. And as an educator, there are so many required resources and required textbooks. And I think it's nice to have a book that you can sit down with, set on the table, have a glass of wine. It's easy on the eyes. You can gift it. Books are lovely to gift. There's permanence almost in a book.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true. Yeah. And you were quoting, I think, Anne Sperling, who said you might be remembered for one generation, but I think there is a legacy in a book, or indeed perhaps a bottle of wine that continues vintage after vintage that will go beyond one generation. So at least that's what I hope too, Jennifer.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You just hit it perfectly there.
Yeah. And so what gave you the idea? I think I might have been hearing you on another interview, but at first you didn't know if you were the person to write the book. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is true. There were a few things that were happening around the same time, and one of them was I've been teaching at Niagara College for 17 years, and I was talking in my classrooms about the mentors that I had had, and encouraging the students to find mentors and talking to them about, well, Debbie Pratt, and Donna Laley, and all of these people. And as the years went by, some of the students didn't. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a travesty. I have to share these stories. And then we were at a funeral for Lloyd Schmidt, and Lloyd was so impactful in this industry. And
What did he do?
Lloyd Schmidt he originally was in BC and then brought his expertise here to Niagara. He has a history with Anne Sperling and her family as well in the Okanagan, but he was a leader in the grape and wine industry here, and
He was a winemaker?
he and a grape grower and a trailblazer, and a mentor to many. So when Lloyd passed away, his two sons, Brian and Alan, who most people know from Vineland Estates, Brian being the
Right.
winemaker and Alan being the president of Vineland Estates, people were getting up and talking about Lloyd, and they were saying, oh, he impacted me this way, and I'll never forget this instance. And his sons were very moved by that and said, I don't think my dad knew that. Oh, did you tell him that? I wish he knew that.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my gosh, a few things here. One, we don't tell people while they're here
So true.
how we feel and the impact that they've had. And two, I looked around in that room, and it was all industry leaders. It was all of them were my mentors. Men, women, students that inspired me. The room was full of so much positive energy and so much leadership and so much history. And I said to Debbie Pratt, my gosh, look around at who's in this room and the stories that are being told in these groups of people chatting and celebrating Lloyd and celebrating one another. And I said to Debbie, somebody needs to write these stories. And, I actually pitched the book to so many people that were writers. And finally I said to Debbie, I think I could do it.
Wow. Yeah. Absolutely. And you did. And what an inspirational story. I hadn't heard that it was at this funeral. What a great, great genesis for the book. Because it's true. Like, I got goosebumps when you were telling me we don't tell people just how wonderful they are until they're gone. Yeah. So remarkable. That's great. So why do you think women's stories in particular, in the Niagara wine industry or elsewhere, have been overlooked for so long?
Well, that's a tough question. It's a bit political for sure. I think that there are many answers to that, many reasons for that. I think if we're going far back to, women were and girls were meant to be seen and not heard. We weren't supposed to be disruptors. We weren't supposed to draw attention. We weren't supposed to win the races and be the fastest or the strongest or the smartest, because we might make men uncomfortable. So that's been ingrained in a lot of us for generations, maybe less so, thankfully, in the younger generations today, but for sure in in older generations we do see that. And so, not only were these women in many cases not going to go and shout about their accomplishments and tell people, they might make men uncomfortable, they might make other women not like them. There's so many layers to this. And then there's also the fact that if they were achieving all of those things, that meant they were busy. They were
True.
busy. Right? So,
And they probably had a family on the side,
right.
that
So,
sort of thing.
we're
Yeah.
not just each one dimensional. If we have our jobs and we have our careers, we probably have friends and family and homes to look after and, all the maintenance that goes into that. And so, we don't have time.
Absolutely. And media coverage, I find, at least my perception, is that it's often about up and coming young women in the industry. Why don't you think there's more media coverage? Maybe not so much books, but media coverage of older women and their contributions. Of course, a lot of that will tie into what you just said. But any further thoughts on that? Why the focus does tend to be on younger women?
Yes, I think that a lot of it does tie into what we just talked about, but it's also the fact that we are often no longer passing down the stories within our families and within our communities. And we learn from stories. It's easy to forget facts and data and stats. I mean, it is for me anyway, but, for a lot of people, we learn from stories and the stories stay with us. So even within societies, that's how we pass down wisdom and knowledge and lessons. And so, and leaders, that's how we remember heroes and heroines and all of those things. So when we stop doing that, those stories stop being told. And the people who were those trailblazers, unless someone is writing a book or there are songs about them or poems or they're in history books, they're forgotten.
It's
The
true.
stories are forgotten.
Everyone needs a Boswell to their Samuel Pepys or whatever. Someone needs to chronicle the stories. These are some of my theories that I'll just throw out. You don't have to agree or disagree or even comment. But sometimes I perceive that a lot of media coverage is also geared toward up and coming young women because we do, as a culture, love youth. We like things that are shiny and new. And also there is perhaps an underlying thread of misogyny sometimes in that young women are also very attractive, but they're also less threatening. They're not as established in the industry. That's not to say we shouldn't keep profiling young women, because if it helps them step up in their careers, let's do it. I just see the absence of older women's stories as partially resting on that foundation of not so shiny, not so attractive, maybe a little bit threatening now that they have perhaps power or real contribution. Also, the roles, I think, and we're going to get into this with some of the women that you profiled, sometimes they were less glamorous. They weren't always out there being the high profile rock star winemaker, perhaps. In some cases, they were as you've said, the glue holding things together in the background, but just as vital, if not more so. Sometimes these operations wineries would have fallen apart without them. But I don't know if you have any comments, or we'll just move on.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think oftentimes there were women that they were behind the scenes. They were behind the scenes in so many cases. And they had roles that were impactful, but possibly not always in the limelight or even outside of the home. But they were still very impactful. You know, I think of some of the most instrumental people that I know as women, and many of them were homemakers. And that is one of the most valuable jobs that we see, you know, those roles falling by the wayside. We're still picking them up as females on top of the other things in many cases. But, you know, there are many, many ways to have an impact. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book the way that I did, which we can talk about.
Yes, like now. What a big lead up, I know. Well, let's talk about the book itself. What was the most surprising insight that you discovered while researching or writing it?
You know, one of the most surprising things that I discovered while writing this book was that each of these women were so incredibly humble. And they, in many cases, didn't see themselves belonging in this book. Huh. And that, to me, that was astounding. And, you know, Walter Senzik, last week on our CKTB interview, we had Linda Bramble with us, and he said to her, Linda, gosh, you've mentored so many of us. You've done this and this and this. He said, along the way, did you know the impact you were having? Did you plan to have that impact? Did you know that you were making history? And she said, no. I was just doing what I thought was the right thing to do. And each of these women said that. Did you plan to make history? Did you plan to have that ripple effect? Did you plan to make that big of a splash or a disruption or a contribution? And the answer is no. A lot of this happened one day at a time.
Right. Wow. Reminds me of, I don't know if it was Oprah or somebody said, just take the next right step, one step at a time, and you'd keep going. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of humility among these women. What's the most interesting thing that someone has said about your book?
Ooh, one of the most interesting things, and I didn't think about this at all until it was mentioned, but one of the most interesting things was, in many cases, you see the women building the men up and the women talking about the men. And I didn't do this consciously, but in the tribute sections, the men are talking up the women and paying homage to them and, you know, praising them. And I didn't think that I was flipping the tables like that. It wasn't actually my intention to do that. But what was wonderful is that so many of the male leaders and mentors in the Ontario grape and wine industry wanted to celebrate these women and said, it's time, let's do this. You know, Donald Zeraldo was so quick and happy to volunteer and say, oh my goodness, I want to talk about Debbie Pratt. Inniskillen would never have unfolded and evolved and been as successful as it was without her. You know,
Wow.
And each of these women has these co-collaborators in their lives that, you know, are men, are women, are family members, our friends, our colleagues, that also in that same spirit want to support and lift them up and celebrate them. And I think that says a lot about the women too.
Right. Yeah, I love the tributes. We'll get to those too. I like that you made it a section at the end of each chapter. So you profile 7 women in the book. We'll start with Debbie Pratt, whom you've just mentioned. She was a former legendary public relations manager. Why did you start with her?
Well, there were a few reasons. The book moves through the 70s and the 80s. And so, chronologically, it made sense to start with Debbie as, Enniskillen in 1974 and 1975. They were one of the first wineries, and Debbie.
They were one of the first wineries to be established in Canada, right? To get a commercial license after Prohibition.
That's
Prohibition
right.
ended in the 30s, but there hadn't been any commercial wineries since then.
Right. So they were granted a temporary license
Okay.
in 1974, and then a permanent in 1975. And so, at that time, there weren't a lot of people using the words premium Ontario wine in the same sentence. But you had 3 people here, Debbie Pratt, Carl Kaiser, and Donald Zeraldo, that believed in this vision. And so, the 3 of them really fueled on ambition, adrenaline, and dreams, laid the groundwork for the Ontario grape and wine industry.
They sure did. Donald Zeraldo being sort of the business person, the promoter, but Debbie was still PR, but Donald was in a different capacity in terms of promoting the winery. And then, of course, Carl Kaiser, who has since passed away, was the winemaker. But the 3 of them really did put Canada, the whole Canadian wine industry, on the map by, as you note in the book, by being at the Wine Expo, which is kind of the Oscars for wine awards, and winning. I think they're up against 4,000 wines. Their ice wine, was it the 1989 ice wine won in the 1991 competition or something like that?
And what Debbie did there as the public relations manager and with her team, as a teacher, she understood that first we start with what people don't know and we help them to understand. So when you're at Vin Expo and this is at this time, and there are all of these people that are wine aficionados and connoisseurs and experts, and here we are, Canada, and I say we, I mean, I wasn't there, but we as an industry, here is a Canadian winery that has just won best wine in the world.
Wow.
And
was this in France, Vinexpo?
Yes.
Or was
Bordeaux.
it in Bordeaux? Oh, the heart of benchmark wine.
Yeah. And so Debbie said, here, let's start with the facts and let's help them understand. And here she had a map of the growing regions of the world. And she said, here we are in Ontario, and the best wine regions are between 30 and 50 degrees north and south latitude. And some of the very best are between 41 and 44. And guess where Ontario is? It's exactly there. So let's talk about why this works. And we've got, the Great Lakes, and we have the escarpment. And she really, there was no opportunity for misunderstanding, because you looked at a map and you said,
So telling.
Right.
Yes, because everybody thinks we're like the Canadian, when they think of Canadians and Canadian wine, oh, it must be up in the tundra somewhere. But we're right along the border with the U.S. And and on that latitude that's similar to, well, depending on which region you're looking at in Canada, Italy or Burgundy, Bordeaux, whatever. So it's the same grape growing latitude as these major benchmark regions.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's remarkable. Now, you mentioned Debbie was a former school teacher. Why was it such a big risk for her to leave her job teaching and join Enniskillen at that time?
Well, there wasn't any precedent set that there could be or was success to be had. She was leaving a job that, was traditionally rewarding for women. It was conducive to a family life in its hours, and it was it offered security in terms of wages and benefits and a pension. And the wine industry offered none of those things in in the
Right.
1970s or 80s.
It's true. And people even doubted that good, as you say, premium Ontario wine could even be made. Wow, what a jump. That took tenacity. And then you also said, she's transferring these skills from her teaching profession to wine, start with what people don't know. She did some other things that were really creative. Like, how did she host tastings at the winery?
Oh, gosh, she just is full of brilliant ideas. So, she really wanted people to taste things blind, which is helpful because then we drop our preconceptions about wine when we don't know what we're tasting.
Right, so the labels are covered. You don't know who made the wine.
That's right. That's right. But what Debbie, again, back to those transferable skills and understanding that everyone learns, has a different learning style, and every opportunity to show what we are doing and to impact premium wine made from premium grapes right here. She made sure that people passed the vineyards where those grapes were grown, so that when they were tasting the wines and they said, my goodness, these wines are amazing. Like, where did you grow these grapes? And Debbie could say, right here. Here are the grapes. Here's the wine. So that was really important for people to understand that sense of place and to pull it all together.
Right. And she did a lot of side-by-side tastings so people could see the differences. I don't know if she was throwing in ringers from Europe at the time or what, but she really opened people's eyes and taste buds to just how good Ontario wine can be.
Yes, she absolutely did. And she was very wise in even in the way that she would sell wine. So she understood that when people were leaving with that wine, and this is something that has stayed with me for my entire career, they were leaving with bottled memories. They weren't just leaving with wine. When they went home and opened that wine and shared it, they were uncorking the experience again and the emotions that they had with Debbie or with Donald or with Carl or with anyone that they had tasted with at Enniskillen. And they relived it, and those emotions were tied to that wine. So there was a connection. So Debbie and Madame Boss both understood that connection very early on. And Debbie poured wine, older vintages where, yes, wineries still, they want to move through their wine because they're holding on to that, and that's capital that could be sold. But Debbie would pour older vintages and say, okay, this is how the wine evolves. So if you like this now, the way that it's drinking, you'll want to buy a case of the next vintage and open it and taste it as it evolves and follow its journey. And she really got people invested in understanding and opening and comparing and seeing what they liked, and then people would come back and say, oh gosh, we loved that wine that we bought here 3 years ago or last year. Can we buy some more of it? And Debbie would say, no, unfortunately, that's gone, but here's what I could encourage you to do, or here's what I suggest. So, it wasn't uncommon if you had an experience with Debbie to leave with a case or more of wine, because you wanted to reenact that and you wanted to share that with the people that you were sharing the wine with.
Absolutely. People do. They want a story. And, this reminds me so much of how books are sold too, Jennifer, and that they're sold one at a time. It is a hand sell, so to speak. So when you have a book event and people have a connection or a story or, and they can share that story of what the experience was at the wine tasting, at the book event with others, that's the most powerful way, I think, that books and wine can be marketed, as opposed to like just blasting on social media. It's nowhere, it pales in comparison in terms of, the effectiveness and the deep roots that you can really implant through a genuine relationship.
Yeah, very well said. I like that.
Yeah. Thank you. So how has the winery since honored Debbie and her contributions?
Oh, Debbie's family, when she goes back there, she is welcomed. We were at Inniskillen yesterday to plan another book signing for June 2nd, which will be exciting and is open to everyone. But she's family. She's a founding member, and there is a vineyard that's named after her, the Debbie Pratt Vineyard, and
Wow.
And it's laid out in the book. There are pictures of Debbie online. So, that vineyard and the continued growth, generation after generation after generation, speaks to the mentorship and the ripple effect that Debbie has made a point of having.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book too that I think it was Debbie who said teachers usually don't have a school named after them, but she has a vineyard of 98 acres that will be, and her name will be on these labels year after year after year. That's so nice. I mean, that's awesome. Let's talk about Dr. Helen Fisher. Who was she and why is she in your book?
Dr. Helen Fisher is a force. She, I think when you read Helen's chapter, whenever anyone reads Helen's chapter, I get messages from them and they say, I've just fallen in love with Helen Fisher. And I said, yeah, you and the rest of the world. She is absolutely brilliant. She's a scientist. She's a grape grower. She's an agriculturalist. She's an educator. She's a professor. She has a PhD. She was one of the first women to teach in a science and agricultural department at a Canadian university.
Wow. And she was at Guelph, right?
She was at Guelph, and she's taught at several universities and several colleges. She's been with the Niagara College Winery and Viticulture Technician program since its inception, since the very first year. Helen's DNA runs through generations of students. It runs through generations of vineyards. There are many people that believe that if we didn't have Helen understanding the importance of site selection in vineyards, the importance of soil, the importance of rootstock, the importance of winter hardiness, that we would not have the thriving grape and wine industry that we have today, not just in Ontario, but across Canada and across North America.
Wow. And you say that she mapped out L'Acadie, which is one of the L'Acadie Blanc, maybe in Nova Scotia, which is one of the leading grapes there. Of course, they have to have more winter hardy grapes there. But is that correct? She was like fundamental in sort of tracing the history of the L'Acadie Blanc grape.
She was, yeah, and also, what's important with Helen is that when a lot of people were talking about making changes from Labrusca to hybrid and then even further into vinifera, there were a lot of people saying this is going to be way too much work. This isn't going to be possible.
Right, the classic grapes, when we talk about Vitis vinifera, like Cabernet, Chardonnay, like people just didn't think it could be done. Or, as you say, too much work in Ontario to switch over from the more rustic grapes, shall we say, that were planted back then.
And Helen was determined, and she was diligent in her research, and she was boots on the ground. She connected the right people. She really believed in a premium grape and wine industry here, and she did literally the work in the groundwork to make it happen. Whether it was weeping tiles or drainage systems or rootstock. I mean, gosh, Helen is ground up.
Wow. She sounds like, yeah, she's out there in the fields. And yet, describe her stature as a woman.
She's very unassuming. Helen is short in stature, but
5'2",
mighty,
I think you
right?
said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She is mighty.
Fierce.
You're not going to find Helen. You wouldn't have found Helen walking around in heels. She would have been in boots or Blundstones. So when we say, she put on her boots and she kicked down barriers, there are a whole group of friends of Helen's and colleagues that will say, she put on her Blundstones. She put on her Birkenstocks and kicked down those barriers in sandals because she did.
Was she a beer drinker, did you say?
She was, yes. Yeah,
Okay,
she was a
interesting. She
beer
made so many
drinker.
contributions. Yeah, that's true dedication when you it's not even your drink of choice.
But she made it a point to always gift Ontario wine and pour it and celebrate it. So her drink of choice would have been, a beer, and from her English heritage, it wouldn't have even been a cold beer. But she was a strong promoter and champion of Ontario wine made from
Wow,
Ontario grapes.
that's terrific. So we're going to keep motoring along so we don't, we're not here till 6 p.m. But
Right.
next up is Donna Laley. So tell us a little bit about her.
So Donna Laley was a teacher also, and
Okay.
fell in love with her in-laws farm on the Niagara Parkway, and she uh, trans transformed that farm from orchards and tree fruit into grapes and vinifera as well at a very early stage. She first was selling her grapes for juice, and then she was selling to local wineries, but she believed in premium wine here. She believed in Pinot Noir specifically, and she worked in those vineyards. She wasn't She was the one who was trellising. She was the one who was planting. She was the one who was out there for, leaf removal and harvest and
And she
walking those
really
grounds.
advanced the Scott Henry trellis method, didn't she, for training vines?
Right. And that was, I am not a viticulturalist, but for Donna to really grasp that as a first of all, again, she's brilliant and she was an educator. So she believed in teaching and learning. And so when she learned about these trellising systems that made it possible to grow grapes, she said, let's implement it. And, there weren't a lot of people doing that then, but Donna said, I believe in this and I'm willing to try it.
And did it just give, I know neither of us are viticulturalists, but just for listeners who might be curious, is it just, it trains the vines along the wires between the posts, but does it give better sun exposure,
Right.
benefits like that to the
Right.
grapes?
And it trains them to grow, in a different way than a vine would naturally grow on their own.
Right.
If we
It would be
think
like a
about
bush shrub. Yeah.
right, if we think about, years and years ago, generations ago, a grapevine would not have been handled much in its life. It would have been handled at planting, and it would have been handled at harvest, and it would have been left on its own for the rest of the time to kind of be wild and put into, too many berries and too much leaf. And Donna really understood that there could be a training system here that could work and provide more premium fruit and
Right.
concentration, and looked at yields and all of those things.
That's
And
fantastic.
there's a line in the book that says she got known for her juice because it was premium.
She had good juice, yeah. And then in 1981, she was named the Niagara Grape King, was she?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So first,
Yeah, go ahead.
first female
First
grape
female.
king.
Well, that reminds me of Jancis Robinson, the British wine writer, being named Decanter's Man of the Year. It's like, okay, I think we need some revision here to catch up with reality.
That's right.
But how did people become? How did that? Was it just a vote to become Grape King?
So it's a nomination by peers.
Okay.
So it is dedication to your vineyards, dedication to the industry, dedication to, producing premium grapes. And so there hadn't been a man doing that. And so in Donna's case, when she was named Grape King, and the subsequent year-long tour that comes along with that, there were many instances where people said to her, oh, are you standing proxy for your husband?
Oh,
And she said, no, I'm the grower. I'm the farmer.
right. Wow. Okay, I love that. I love that image. Linda Bramble is next, and I think, correct me if I'm confusing this with somebody else, but I think I love the way she's described in one tribute as sweet with just the right amount, a right touch of acidity.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's Elena Gailey Pride is my co-collaborator and visionary on this book as well, and editor. So, that was a tasting note that she wrote in tribute to
That's
Linda as
great.
one of her, Elena and I were both students of Linda, both in the classroom and of life, and just adore her. So Elena wrote that tribute many years ago and found
Yeah,
it, and
and
we included it.
oh, that's wonderful. And while we're on Elena, you mentioned some of the proceeds of this book. What did Elena do with, in terms of the proceeds or her part of the income or whatever?
Yeah. Elena is one of the most generous and thoughtful individuals. She's always finding ways to celebrate others and pay it forward. And she continues to do that every day, but, in a very generous way. She redirected the proceeds that I would have paid her as the editor of this book, and she donated them to a bursary for female students at Niagara College.
Wonderful. Wow, that's great. All right, let's go back to Linda Bramble. Who is she? And what obstacles did she have to overcome in her career?
So Linda's a sommelier, an educator. She has a PhD in leadership. So, when we think about this, she has a whole career a teaching career in leadership and entrepreneurship, that she has used those transferable skills as a sommelier and as a mentor within the wine industry, to build up future leaders. So she was a single parent. She knew that she needed to become educated to get some credibility and legitimacy in the wine world and in the teaching world in academia. So, she went after and earned all of the credentials that she could, a master's,
Well, she had two children, young
PhD.
children. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Wow.
left, she was born in the States and there were more opportunities here in Canada. And she came here. Like, you think about everything that she did. And she just said, okay, one day at a time, one foot in front of another. I'm just going to keep learning. I'm just going to keep developing myself. She did. And in the
Remarkable.
process, she led and developed so many of us in this industry.
That's fantastic. She's a great writer too. I've read her
Wonderful
pieces on
writer.
wine in various magazines and so on. But yeah, she has a gift with words as well. Debbie Zimmerman, who started as a journalist in the region, then ran for council when she was just 22 years old. She has a bit of a funny story when she was out campaigning, going door to door to meet constituents. Maybe you could share that. That's in the book as well.
It is in the book, yeah. So Debbie, if you're thinking about the 70s again, and you're thinking about women in politics, Debbie had to get so many signatures in order to move forward in her campaign. And so she had to knock on doors, and she did so. And when you knock on doors, you're usually doing that in the evenings. And so, she would be out there knocking on doors and campaigning and getting signatures. And more often than not, the head of the household, the man, would answer the door and in many cases would say to her, "What are you doing? And why aren't you home cooking dinner for your husband and your family?" And,
Uh-huh.
Debbie said, "I just wasn't deterred. I refused to let that derail me." And she said, and you know what? Oftentimes standing behind him would be a woman in the background, maybe with a child, or drying her hands on a dish towel, or, making dinner or what have you. And that woman would be in the background going, "Yes,
With two
keep
thumbs up,
going."
yes.
Exactly. And Debbie said, "I just pulled
It's
strength
great.
from that. And I wasn't doing this just for me. I was doing it for every woman."
Wow. And, you even note in the book, her mother sounds like a strong woman. It was something to the effect they debate politics around the kitchen or the dining room table. There were 8 kids. And when her father wasn't listening to her mother or disagreed, her mother would say something like, I don't care if you don't agree with me. My vote cancels out yours anyway. That's great.
Yeah.
What do you think she learned from growing up in a family of 8 children?
Yeah, I led her chapter with that as well because, one of the reasons is each of these women have different childhoods, but it's so important for us as the reader to be able to see ourselves in each of these women. And whether it's, a noisy family of multiple children or, a situation with some of the other women where they were individual children or had smaller families, but to be one of so many children and to be right in the middle, as Debbie Zimmerman was, she had to learn to be the observer. So she watched the older ones and she watched the younger ones. And, if she was called on to take sides, she had to do so very strategically and consider all of the consequences and consider, the best outcomes for everyone, because there are ripple effects in sibling, disputes in a household.
Absolutely. Diplomacy at 8 years old.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And what did she
Brilliant woman.
learn? Yeah, absolutely. What do you think she learned from Nellie McClung, the Canadian politician who advocated to give Canadian women the right to vote in 1914?
Right. So Nellie McClung, in the definition of persons, said, why shouldn't women be included in the definition of persons? And Debbie Zimmerman read that and embodied that and said, why shouldn't they? Why not? Why not me? Why not her? And, it didn't matter what no was thrown at Debbie Zimmerman. Her answer, or that something couldn't be done, or you're not the person to do it. She straightened her shoulders and she looked them in the eye and she said, why not?
Yeah, that's great. I often look back even on my own life and think, it was some of the no's that pushed me harder than had I been faintly encouraged. It's almost like, I don't know if it's just bullheadedness on my nature, not Debbie's, that you just want to push past those no's and prove them wrong. Like that, yeah, we can do it.
Yes, we can.
Now, Debbie became the head of the Grape Growers Ontario. How did her political and journalism careers help her negotiate between grape growers and wineries? And what sort of negotiations would there have been? Like, what would be an example of what she would have to diplomatically negotiate?
Oh, that's a tough question for me. I would think that in a lot of cases, things that Debbie had to negotiate would have been things that, there were multiple sides, multiple stakeholders.
Sure.
Again, drawing on her ability to see the big picture and to listen. So, for Debbie, she found ways to be seen and heard in boardrooms and spaces that women weren't traditionally seen and heard in, and found a way to use her voice. So how she negotiated things really they were fair, they were genuine, and they had the best outcome for everyone involved that she could negotiate herself.
She must have developed a lot of trust among all the parties at the table for sensitive discussions like what prices are grapes going to be this year or whatever. I'm just guessing at the kinds of things that they would have to settle between them.
Yes, and that's a major one right there.
Yeah.
Is the price points of, you've got different boards and different stakeholders and different marketing boards, etc. So for Debbie, representing the farmers and the growers, and also understanding the economic impact and the ripple effect of those, and for the wineries too, and regionally, economically. So, she understood the grants that had to come in, and the monies and the funding that she had to procure and secure for the Niagara region. And she did, because again, she could look at things big picture and present all sides of a case and say, hey, look, this benefits everyone. And she earned that trust. People believed in her and believed in her intentions to best serve her community. And that's who Debbie is.
You've included one of my favorite winemakers, Anne Sperling. She grew up on a family farm and vineyard in BC, helping pick the grapes as a child. How has she led the charge in Canada for biodynamic and organic wines, both in BC and here in Ontario?
So for Anne, she shares that growing up on a farm, growing up on an organic farm as a child, with your siblings in the vineyards, being part of the tying and, the harvesting and all of the things that are required on a farm for all the generations to participate in. She said she remembers that there were insects and there were butterflies and there were birds and there were, all kinds of things, flowers and things. And, imagine as a child being distracted by all of those and just being outside, and it was beautiful. And then she began working in places that weren't that. And they were sterile and
using chemicals or whatever, fertilizers or pesticides, fungicides.
Yeah. That's right. So there was an absence of all of the diversity and all of the ecosystem that had made, the premium grapes and added to the character and, mitigated some of the need, some of those beneficial parts of the ecosystem when they were removed through pesticides and all of those things. The chemicals had to step in, the other fertilizers had to step in, whereas she sees a vineyard as a whole and she sees the ecosystem as a whole. So for her, she was moving towards more sustainability. She was moving towards, the impact on the vineyards, but also the impact on communities. And, when she was at Malivoire, it was such a great fit for her because the owners of Malivoire lived on the property. They lived by the vineyards. So they did not want chemicals being sprayed. They didn't want all of these detrimental chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides on their property around their children and their pets and their family and loved ones. So it was a really great fit for Anne to, with some support from the Malivoires and from the community, to work towards finding better solutions and moving some of the regulations and some of what was possible to bring into Canada as replacements, if you will. Again, I don't have Anne's expertise on there for sure, but when you read about the things that, like, there weren't substitutions that were safe, and so for Anne, working together and leading the charge to find those and to make them available was so impactful, not just for Niagara and Ontario and Canada, coast to coast in Canada, but then she goes on to do that and revitalize a vineyard in Mendoza as well.
Right. And she and her husband, Peter Gamble, they've consulted out in Nova Scotia. I think it's Blomidon Winery. Elsewhere, and now they've got 2 new enterprises, I think, in Ontario. There were Sperling Vineyards, which I think has since been sold, but her influence is far and wide and profound when it comes to the environment too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to mention that Anne also established the first appellation in Canada for orange wines, and it was only the second one in the world after South Africa. And these are made like white wines, except they get more skin contact and take on various shades of amber and orange. And now many other wineries in Ontario and across the country and across the world, around the world, make orange wine. So that's another one of her contributions. Yeah, and she makes an observation, which I'll just throw out there. I don't think either of us have the answer, but I think it's a interesting observation she makes in that Ontarians don't drink as much Ontario wine as BC and Nova Scotia residents do of the wines made in their respective provinces. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing if it's because it's such a bigger market here, but I don't buy that. I'm not sure what it is, but I think perhaps we just need more confidence in our own wines here as purchasers.
Yeah.
So
we just had the Ontario Craft Winery Conference last week, and that was one of the biggest discussions, and it continues to be a very big discussion here. Why aren't Ontarians drinking more Ontario wine? Why aren't they choosing more Ontario wine? Why aren't government bodies pushing forward for that? And it's a multifaceted and political discussion, but at the end of the day, as an Ontario resident, as an Ontario consumer, we must see the value in purchasing our own product. We must see the value in promoting our own products. We must see the value in promoting and supporting our small businesses and our growers and farmers. I mean, we understand this. Farmers feed cities. We know all of these things. But, as an Ontario resident, when you walk into the LCBO or the grocery store or anywhere, choose Ontario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For so many reasons, as you say, these wineries, 90% of them are small family farms, fewer than 20 employees, even fewer often than that. And when you buy local, you're just doing so much to support this business, but also you're not shipping wines from everywhere around the world. Now, I'm saying, I'm not saying don't buy anything else, because the beauty of wine is in its diversity, but we could be supporting so much more locally.
Right. So we would like to see some challenge for sure go out in saying, if you buy this many bottles of wine a month, make sure that this many are from Ontario. Right. And here's the impact. So, there's a lot of us within the industry that are working towards some impactful marketing towards that. There's been a lot of that understanding with farmers and buying from fruit stands and things like that, if every family redirected $10 a month of their spending towards buying local, here's the impact on farmers. Well, the same can be true for Ontario wines. These are farmers. These are grape growers. These are businesses. These are our brothers and sisters and cousins and families and friends and colleagues, and we need to support them.
Absolutely. And there've been lots of studies, like for every bottle of Ontario wine or Canadian wine, it injects $80 to $90 into the economy, the local economy, versus, just $18 for a foreign import. It might be even lower than that. The numbers were staggering in terms of the differences, and just the spin-off jobs, the tourism, the trade, the restaurants, manufacturing, even when it comes to bottles and so on.
I think it's an education in a lot of cases, and we need to work harder at that as an industry, and we need our governing bodies to work harder as in that level of education for the consumers to understand the impact.
Absolutely.
And instill a sense of pride, so that when the consumers are leaving with that Ontario wine, they're like, woohoo, I'm an Ontario wine supporter. I feel good about this. They walk a little taller. They're not stuffing it in their bag. They're like, yeah, hey, you want to see what's in my grocery cart? What's in my LCBO cart? It's an Ontario wine, and I'm proud of that.
I can see why you won the VQA as a promoter award. This podcast is brought to you by... No, that's okay. Absolutely. I'm just as proud to drink Ontario and Canadian wine. And, not just to be patriotic, the wines are great. The quality speaks for itself. So, all right, we're preaching to the converted here. We're singing from the same choir sheet. Next up is Barbara Leslie, who passed away in 2023. What contribution did she make to the Ontario wine industry?
Barb was Yvonne Irving in her tribute called Barb quietly powerful. And Barb, oh gosh, not only was she quietly powerful, but she was powerfully empowering. So Barb poured into people. She taught and was the advisor at Niagara College. So, she was very instrumental in empowering students and educating students in finding their helping them find their place in the industry, building up their self-efficacy. But she had come from Montreal, and she worked with the Epimium Society. So that had several layers of impact. So some of the things that Barb did was she was the first publisher, female publisher of a Canadian wine magazine, and that was Wine Tidings at the time. So what a lot of people don't realize is when you think about the big names like Tony Aspler and Conrad Edgepitch and Thomas Bachelder, Barbara Leslie mentored them. She edited their work. I would encourage everyone to read Thomas Bachelder's tribute to Barbara Leslie in her chapter, because she was quietly powerful and she wanted to celebrate other people. But when she came from the Epimium,
which is a wine club in Canada, just for those who may not be familiar with it, they ship wine to you every month.
Yeah. And also, in the early years of Epimium, members could join wine tours, wine immersive trips around the world. And Barbara organized and led those trips. She spoke multiple languages, so she could take you to France, and she did. And she could take you to Italy, and she did. And she was a connector. So she learned early on from a tour experience what the guests, what the visitors wanted. And she also learned about what the wineries, the hosting wineries, needed too. So she was able to find those connections and to create very meaningful experiences and memorable experiences. And she understood the value of those connections and relationships long after the trip was over and the tour was over, the visit to the winery and the wine region. Those people went back and talked about their experiences, and they met the winemaker and they walked through these vineyards and they tasted this wine, and they went on to share those stories, and now they were invested in those places. So that was so important, and Barbara understood that. So when she came here and she started working behind the scenes to bring tours to Niagara and to collaborate with other educational institutions across Ontario and Canada, and she brought them here and she said, hey, we need to get educators of wine from other provinces in Canada here, so that when they're teaching in their classrooms about Niagara and Ontario, they can say, and when we went there and we met this winemaker and we walked through the vineyards, and yes, we held that soil and we saw the slopes and we understand. So Barbara was brilliant.
Sounds significant. Really. I'm sorry I don't think I ever met her before she passed away. All right, we're going to keep motoring on here. Nicolette Novak pioneered agri-tourism. What is that, and how did she do it?
So agri-tourism, at a time when we're talking about farming wasn't cool. To a lot of people, it wasn't glamorous. It was dirty. It was hard work. Terms like farmer's hands were derogatory. So we just talked again about, the necessity of farming and the importance of farmers and how they, feed cities and provide all of the things. So, Nicolette was really, she had traveled the world, and she understood that there was an appreciation and a respect for the way food was grown, and the way food was savored, and the way meals were shared and talked about, the ingredients and how things were prepared. And she wanted to bring that back here to her family farm. So her family farm in Beamsville, which was the Good Earth, So when Nicolette traveled and she came back to what she said was just this little slice of heaven here in Niagara, she wanted other people to experience this. And this was pre Food Network days. So it wasn't cool. A lot of people didn't know all of these things. When we think about what gourmet was or quality, it usually was imported for a lot of people. It meant French or Italian. It meant imported. And she really worked hard to turn that around and to get people to embrace literally the fruits of the labors here and to get out into the orchards and the vineyards and to taste produce that was still warm from the sun and see those differences. So agri-tourism, she got people from the city to come here and embrace that experience and to say, wow, like, hey, before we leave, we're picking up peaches from Niagara because they're the best peaches around. And we're picking up cherries from Cherry Lane in Beamsville. And,
Sure.
exactly. So she got people embracing the gifts of our region.
Yeah, and she really had a passion for teaching people, the deep connection between the food and the land, as you note in the book. And she had the cooking school as well, the Good Earth Cooking School. So it's pretty remarkable. She did note, though, in your book, everyone else's playtime is her work time. So it does take a toll, but we've talked about that too, in the wine industry, even going back to Debbie Pratt in terms of the hours. There can be a price to pay, but people still willingly do it. Finally, you have the late Madame is it Andrea Bosque?
Yeah.
Andrea Bosque, who sounds like a really real character, a real firm matriarch of Chateau des Charmes. Of course, she has, as I mentioned, just since passed away. In a way, she reminds me a little bit, the way you describe her, like Madame Veuve Clicquot, Barbe Ponsardin, Veuve Clicquot, of the Champagne fame. So you didn't get to interview her. She had a remarkable contribution, Chateau des Charmes, and her family still runs this. But what would you have asked her had you been able to interview her?
I asked all of the women the same questions. I was mining. I was mining for wisdom and insights. And Madame, oh, I wanted to know her motivation. I wanted to know what kept her going because Madame, she elevated hospitality here. She understood innately, and part of that was being European, but part of it was just who she was. But she understood innately that people were coming to taste the amazing wine made by her talented husband, Paul Bosque Sr. But for Madame, she knew that they needed context for these wines. So, she was the experience. It wasn't just about the wine. Madame created the experience, and she said to you, smell this and taste this, and you must use this for when you're making your roast or when you're steaming your mussels, and then have a glass for you and a glass for your guests and a glass for the pot, and
sit up straight. Get your elbows off the table.
and you'll need 2 more bottles because everyone's gonna love this so much. And
Yeah. Wow.
the relationship of the family that people saw, her husband making the wine, but it was Madame who said, coming here to Canada, and they settled in Montreal because it made sense. French was their first language. She was pregnant, she had a toddler, and she still said, we're going to Ontario, we're going to Niagara, this is our dream, we're going to do it. And I don't know many people who would have traveled continents with a toddler and being pregnant again and saying, this is what we need to do, this is our dream. We don't even speak fluent English, but yes, let's do it. I mean, if she hadn't said that, I mean, if you had known Madame and Madame said no, you listened. But Madame said yes. And so they came to Ontario because primarily she said they were.
Remarkable. And Chateau des Charmes is a wonderful winery to visit. Great tasting room and obviously excellent wines. Have you discovered anything since you wrote the book that you'd add to a new edition?
That's a great question. Within this book, we covered women from various sectors that have been required to build this industry. You know, there's lots of collaboration needed. In the next book, I don't want to say too much about the next book because the next book is underway.
Oh, how exciting.
And we are working on that because, you know, we ended this book in the mid-90s and there have been so many leaders and mentors coming forward. Things that I discovered that I'd like to go forward. I think, again, I think the tributes were powerful. What would I do differently? I'm not sure. I have to tell you, I'm really happy with this book. I'm happy with the impact that it's had. So I would have to think about what I would do differently.
Sure.
And I'm sure that as the readers and hopefully, you know, listeners are reading and listening, they're going to come forward and say, hey, you know, here's some of those things. And it's why we got an editor, because I couldn't change the book. I was too close to the book. I couldn't change the words. I couldn't shear it down. I couldn't do any of those things. So even now, what would I do differently? I don't know. Maybe have a beta reader like how you did with yours, I think is brilliant, because then you get that input and you have an opportunity to do that before the book is finished.
Yeah, very valuable. But yeah, no, it's very exciting. New edition. What was the most difficult part of writing the book, or any personal challenges you faced? Anything you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, the book started in February 2019, and the world was different, and my life was different, and everybody's life was different in this book. And so, you know, challenges were getting people to connect through the pandemic, to move past the fear and anxiety that everybody had. You know, a lot of people said, oh, the pandemic must have been a great time to write a book. Well, not a collaborative book, it wasn't.
Right.
So, you know, connecting with people and to get the stories and to get those things was tricky. Things that I learned, though, are that in the dark times that we had through the pandemic, and that each of these women had, and that I had personally, through those times, it's these stories of strength and leadership that keep us going. So I drew so much personal strength and inspiration to keep putting one foot in front of another while writing these. And I think, you know, for the tribute writers too, it felt good to share with people and their mentors and these women the impact that they had on them. So it really was a source of light and joy and inspiration and strength.
Wow. So just before, you've got two wines that I still want to hear about.
Yes.
To taste there before. But Niagara for a moment. You're there. And of course, all of these women have contributed to building. You quote Lewis Carroll about Niagara. I love this quote. There is a place like no place on earth, a land full of wonder, mystery, and danger. Some say to survive it, you need to be as mad as a hatter, which luckily I am. What is it about Niagara that you love most? And can you share a few tips for those planning to visit Niagara?
Oh, that is easy. What I love most about Niagara is the people. I love the passion and the dedication. I love the sense of community. I don't know that if that exists. I hope it exists elsewhere in the world, but I know here in Niagara that if you are part of our grape and wine or tourism and hospitality industry, you are part of a family. You have a cheering squad, you have a support system, and it is like no other place on earth, and it is really special here in Niagara.
Love
So
that.
my
And it,
my suggestion: get to
yes.
know the people. Get to know the people
Okay.
when you come. Read the stories. Do your research and ask when you come to what's the stories behind here. Are those people
Yeah.
here? Could we meet them?
Right. When you walk into a tasting room, sure, taste the wines, but ask about the people behind the
Yeah.
bottle as
And
well.
ask the servers too.
Yes.
What's your connection? Why do you love working
True.
here? Because
Yeah.
they have so much insight to share. And
It's a
hopefully
great tip.
they're really proud.
Awesome. All right. Which two wines do you have there,
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Okay. So I'm excited about both of these wines. I'm going to hold up
All
both
right.
bottles at the
Yes,
same
please.
time here.
And we'll put a link in the show notes to these
Great.
wines so that people can find them.
Okay. So in celebrating women and in celebrating the next generation, I wanted to pour
Okay.
two wines here that do that. So we've got Maynard and we have Liebling. So Maynard is made, and both of these women are involved in the book as well. So Yvonne Irving is the winemaker for Maynard and the founder. And
Okay.
it is, Maenads were the female followers of Dionysus and known for their wild behavior. They were
Love them already.
nonconformists. Exactly. They defied the expected role of women, and they're creative. So, with this, the tagline is Wines and Women Untamed. And she celebrates diversity. So, you're having a look at this label. There's diversity, there's collaboration, there's creativity and playfulness. This is a brand that you want to get to know. This is the Chardonnay. It is absolutely beautiful. Before I jump into the Chardonnay, just so I make sure that I am talking about Liebling. So
Yes.
Liebling, again, this is a brand that is also new. So when we think about the next generation, so Matthias Oppenländer, who wrote the tribute in the book as well, his two daughters, Allison and Jessica, are behind this brand. Liebling means darling in
Ah,
German. And so this particular brand is celebrating Niagara, is celebrating the family farm and the vineyards, and each of the wines has a little bit of a story behind it. So this particular wine is Allison's inspiration, and in the vineyard here, Allison is the bookworm. So if you follow Allison, she's a great educator, a bookworm, a reader. She just posted a beautiful review of my wine. I already knew I wanted to pour Liebling, and then I saw this review and I just thought, oh my goodness, the sense of collaboration again and celebration of one another is amazing. But
she posted a review of your book?
she did, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you said my wine, so I just wanted to make
Oh,
sure.
sorry,
Do you have a winery that we don't know about, Jennifer? Okay.
but
Okay, cool.
here's Allison here in the
Ah,
vineyard with her book. The
excellent. I
things
love that.
the things that I love about the Gamay when we're talking about that is that as we're going into the summer months, I love Gamay all year long, but going into the summer months, it's great because it's chillable, right? So it's a great way
Yes,
to carry this
absolutely.
forward. Did you want to?
So we'll just get a brief, yeah, just give us a brief tasting note on each one. You've got the Chardonnay Mayad. So what do you get from that?
Yeah, so this is a wild ferment. All of Yvonne's are wild ferment, going with the wild women and untamed.
Wild
Wild
yeast.
ferment,
Yeah.
wild yeast, all of those things. Also bottled unfiltered. So
Okay.
she has a low intervention approach to her winemaking. So to preserve as much character. This is from the Grimsby Hillside Vineyard. So as she's going through, she's looking to find expression of the terroir, which is important to her. So, the great thing about this is that you can still have beautiful, crisp, clean fruit expression with wild ferment and with low intervention. And Yvonne is a trailblazer in showing that here. So, the thing about
Right.
Chardonnay that's so important for a lot of people is that combination of fruit, but also the richness that we get as a winemaking influence. So that is here. It's very integrated. One does not overpower the other. So it's a lovely balance of bright fruit, peach and nectarine, and spice, and this beautiful subtle hazelnut that comes through from the lees contact and the French oak there. So
Lovely. Wow.
yeah, if you're looking for a
Sounds
Chardonnay
great.
that celebrates the land, and women and small batch winemakers,
That's it.
that's it.
Maya, Yvonne Irving. All right. And then you've got the Liebling.
And the Liebling, yes. So
And that's,
again, this particular wine is full of bright berry fruit, all of the things that people think about with Gamay. It is approachable, it's expressive, it has so much red fruit, and then the spice that lends itself, naturally as primary characteristics from the grape. But this one was treated in a pretty serious way with some French oak also. So you have this added layer that elevates the fruit and adds a more complexity to it. So you're finding, some spice and some vanilla and some of those baking characteristics that add interesting layers to the Gamay. And being only 12.5%,
wow.
again, it showcases our cool climate, and it takes you into the warmer months in a wine that can be chilled down and doesn't demand big meals. It's easy to be enjoyed on its own, or with food or without food, but with friends is the best way to enjoy either of these wines.
Absolutely. 12.5% alcohol. That's nice and low.
It is.
For the summer. Summer red. Those are wonderful. And I cannot believe how time has flown. Oh my goodness. I had lots more, but let's just, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention? I'm going to ask you where we can get your book and so on, but is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Jennifer?
Anything else that I would like to mention? I think that, this book is not exclusively for women. It's not exclusively for people that are interested in the grape and wine industry. This book is about leadership. It's about finding role models and being role models. It's about celebrating one another. And it's about, as we're finding out who we want to be in the world, and, who we want to be, how we are is just as important. And for each of these women, they were all mentors, and that they make it a point to mentor others. And I think that we each have that opportunity each day to impact others, either positively or negatively. And I hope everybody chooses positively.
Yes. And they should choose your book as an inspiration. Sharing a Glass. Congratulations, Jennifer.
Thank you
Well
so
done.
much.
And where can we get the book?
So most Niagara wineries are carrying the book, which is fantastic, and more are picking it up. It was just released last month, so it's moving quickly. Like I said, we've got an event at Inniskillen that's open to everyone, and Debbie Pratt will be there also, so that'll be a great opportunity. On June 2nd. There will be subsequent events at Malivoire, at Fielding, at 13th Street, at Sue Ann Staff. So all of these wineries are carrying the book. Niagara College Teaching Winery. If a winery isn't carrying the book, please ask them to carry the book.
Yes.
And, Chapters is carrying it, Indigo, Amazon. You can order directly from Friesen Press also. And, yeah. It's a great gift.
Great.
Mother's Day's coming.
There you go. Perfect. I mean, wow, that's great. And where can we find you online, Jennifer?
So we've just had a website constructed this week, actually. So at sharingaglass.com. We're adding to the website regularly. So, there'll be an opportunity on there. And I do want to point this out, is that, it's difficult to cover all of the women. It's difficult to cover, especially the next generation too, where there's more and more and more women. So there's going to be a tab on the website for this next book, and for subsequent female-focused and leadership-focused events, where you can nominate someone that you feel deserves recognition. And so I think I'd like the website to really work as that funnel to gather all the good stories and all of the people that we need to know about. So that will be there as well. So I hope people do visit the website as it's being developed and share
Sharing a glass. Okay, sharingaglass.com.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jennifer, we shall have to share a glass in person next time. That would be a lot of fun. So thank you very much for sharing all of these amazing stories, very inspirational, and for writing the book. Congratulations on publishing it. It's a remarkable achievement.
Thank you. Well, it was a collaborative effort, 100%. It was a shared effort.
Very collegial of you to say, yes.
Absolutely.
Spoken like a true leadership woman, leader woman. All right.
Thank you so much for having me on here. You know, it's been great to have someone that I've looked up to and read your books all these years, and now, you know, to be here and to be talking, you know, about other amazing women with an inspiring woman. So
thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I'll say goodbye for now, but I'm looking forward to following the success of your book and to getting together in person. So don't sign off completely, but I will wrap this up now, and I raise my glass to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, and mine to you.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers.